Good morning. We'll be starting up here in about, oh, minute and a half, right after the top of the hour. We'll give folks a few seconds after the top of the hour. Wonder if anybody got to see the lunar eclipse this morning. Couldn't see it here. It was cloudy, but supposedly there was clear skies north. Okay, people are logging in. You might want to go ahead and open up your pods if you're familiar with that, both your chat pod and your Q&A pod. I'll talk about them in a sec. And then, of course, get ready to do polls via pollev.com/DavidOrPE. If you open the chat pod up, we can send you the links. We'll do that here again after the top of the hour. So you don't have to type all those things in. We've got the magic of Jody and Amanda in the background and Barbara taking the registrations. Okay. We'll give folks another 30 seconds or so to finish logging in, and then we'll get started with snow and ice overview. And I know the first question every one of you has. Okay. Good morning and welcome to the penultimate webinar for our winter series, Snow and Ice Overview. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the Cornell Local Roads program, and welcome. We are your New York State LTAP Center, and glad to help you out in any way we can. And so the question I know a lot of you have is, why are we talking about snow and ice now? Well, in a lot of respects, it's a great time to look back at snow and ice, and as we're coming out of the winter. Now, in terms of our webinar series, the reason it's our penultimate, we have one more coming up next week on pavement maintenance, and then we'll be getting into our in-person workshop season, our spring workshops. We will be coming back in the summer, as we've been doing the last few years. Um, and so we'll be doing classes. The top five are all scheduled and running around the state. The Well-Rounded Roads, which is essentially our updated version of Complete Streets, we're still working on some of the dates for that. They're probably going to get pushed off into the summer for those of you who are interested in the Well-Rounded Roads Complete Streets concepts. Now, if you haven't been on one of these webinars before, bottom left corner is your audio settings. Open up your chat pod. That is one way. Chat pod is not where you to put in information. It's where we can send you links to both the handout. There's a handout with an outline and resources you might want to look at later, and a listing of all the webinars we've been doing this past winter and the ones that will be coming up this summer, though we don't have dates yet. We'll have those scheduled here pretty soon. And then the Q&A, I do want you to open that up because that's where you can put in your questions to us, and I may ask you to do that a few times. And I may ask you to raise your hands, and that's all we use in the raise hands feature. We just ask you once in a while. I'll do that 2 or 3 times during our hour together. Okay, with that, this is worth one professional development hour. Just so you know, here in New York State, only the person registered can have it. And it's counted as a course, though that's not as critical as it used to be for getting your continuing ed for engineers. If you're from another state, you'll need to check with your LTAP center. And while we're New York State focused here, this is pretty generic stuff, so you could check with them and see. So let's start with the welcome. Again, we're going to be using polls, pollev.com/DavidOrPE. And again, if you've opened up your chat pod, the link should be there and we can reset that link for you. So let's first off see a few of you have already started. I can see. Who do you work for? Town, county, city or village, state or federal, tribal, MPOs, some kind of authority like the Thruway Authority or consulting firm, contractor, or you just are working for a living. And we got quite a variety today. That's maybe the biggest variety that I've seen. And again, if you can't access the polls for some reason, you're welcome to throw them in the Q&A, and I will look at that to see, especially if there's any particular answers that I'm looking for. So I see somebody who's added in the county and somebody who's added in that they're consultants, things like that. Okay, that's useful for me. A great variety. I like it. Okay. What is your job? Are you an administrator? Are you the highway superintendent, commissioner? If you're a deputy, please check that box. Are you primarily an engineer, a planner? You're out in the field? You're a supervisor or a board member? You do whatever the boss tells you to do, or none of the above? And I would ask if you type in none of the above, please put that into the Q&A to tell me what that is. And I see a few folks who say they're the engineers, highway superintendents, a contract manager. Okay. Okay. Again, a lot of engineers is not surprising because of the PDHs given out, but at the same time, it's good to see a good variety of folks. Okay. Now, how long have you been in your current position? Less than 3 months. In other words, you started this year. Less than a year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, 11 to 20, or you've been there so long that the grass is growing around your feet. Wow, again, quite a variety. I like to see it. That's cool. And we got a couple of fairly new folks. Okay. And over in the Q&A, I see everything ranging from 11 to 20, 3 to 5, only 2 months. Okay. Yes, but Gary's got lots of experience. So 2 months in the current job, but you're right. I did say current position. Good point. Okay, and we got good variety there. And then click on the map. You get to click where you're from. And it just gives me a sense. Are we talking mostly folks downstate, upstate? So we're talking our friends that used to be in Lake Ontario. We had a guy from clicked in the middle of Lake Ontario every time. Okay. Wow, all over the state. That's even better. And a couple from Vermont and Connecticut. Okay, not too far from my mother-in-law. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about snow and ice. And why are we talking about snow and ice now? A lot of times we've done this webinar, we've done it in the summer, getting ready for the following year. But as we're thinking about it, this is actually a great time to look at your snow and ice issues. Okay? We'll talk a little bit about weather issues that have come up, and this year being a little bit different than maybe we've seen the last few years. The level of service that we have to deal with on our roadways, the materials that you're using to take care of the snow and the ice, and your equipment, of course. We'll talk a little bit about your snowplow routes. Don't have a lot of time to do everything, but we'll do what we can. Dealing and we'll end with emergencies. And throughout the webinar, we're going to be talking about policy. Okay. Now, again, the weather today is actually going to be a light rain, maybe a little bit of mixed snow, depending where you are. Um, in the state, actually quite a bit of variety. But it's only been, think about it, it's only been a little over a week and a half, and we had one of the largest snowstorms ever out on Long Island, the blizzard. There are places out in Rhode Island that got 3 feet plus in terms of snow. And you can actually see, this is a picture sent to us by one of our circuit riders. You can see how much snow they were getting. And when they were done digging it out, they just dug out trenches and had to wait for it to melt. So yeah, we got to deal with some pretty nasty weather. Now, the weather data that's in that map comes from the Northeast Regional Climate Center, which is part of the National Weather Service. They're actually stationed here at Cornell in a tall building with no windows. Uh, but that's where they are. Actually, they've actually moved to another building that has windows, but not a lot. But they used to be in one the tall building with no windows, which we always found fun. But the point is that you're going to get blizzards now and then. We may still get a nor'easter. Everybody knows that a lot of times we get big storms in March. So winter isn't over yet. But I want to look back at this year to think about how we can get better for next year. Okay? So why is snow and ice critical? We're going to build a wordle. So do this as one word. If you put multiple words in, they're going to break themselves apart. So why is snow and ice critical? Okay? Let's see what y'all come up with. Safety, of course, will come up, I suspect, as the top item, but let's see what else y'all come up with. Liability. Yeah, liability comes into play a lot. Mobility, travel. Okay? You got to worry about the economics of it. Okay? You got to deal with the public. It does help the economy and commerce, getting from point A to point B. I mean, you think about when that blizzard occurred, everything got shut down. Nothing could move. And we expect to get from point A to point B in almost any time of year. And yes, safety is probably our number one thing that we're thinking about, but there's other issues to think about when it comes to snow and ice. And we can only shut down for so much for so long. So if I sort of look at it overall, you just think about the fact that yes, we want the roads to be able to be driven, maybe not necessarily nice and black like this on the upper left, but we got to get the people to school and to work. We're going to make sure it's as safe as possible. We're going to be out there working in these conditions, and hopefully we've got on our proper personal protective equipment. And we're trying to balance all of this And yet, at the same time, we don't want to do something that might damage the environment. Putting down too much salt, even too much sand, can create issues environmentally for us. So these are a balancing act with snow and ice control. And of course, we have to deal with all kinds of weather to deal with. So let's do another Wordle this time. I think it's a Wordle. This one might actually be a text box, as I can't remember off the top of my head. What kind of winter weather have you had to deal with this past winter? It is a text box. It's going to come up. So you had to deal with ice storms, possibly, and sleet. We may still get some sleet. Okay. And of course, snow. And snow comes in different types. It can be light and fluffy. It can be heavy and deep. It can be just cold, cold weather. I mean, this extremely cold weather we've been having is part of the winter issues that we deal with and moving pavements and heaving. And again, if we had more than 1 hour, we could even talk about that some. So there's all kinds of fun stuff we have to deal with in terms of weather. We haven't even talked about the wind issues that we deal with. Freezing rain. Nobody's put freezing rain down today. But to me, freezing rain is the one I like the least. A blizzard, usually you can know what's coming. But yeah, ice. Ice can be challenging for us in dealing with that. Yep. So there's all kinds of winter weather. We have to be ready for all of them. That's what we're expected to be ready for. And so, where can you get good information? Well, again, this comes from the from the Northeast Regional Climate Center, the NRCC. It's one of the links in the handout. And again, if you've opened up your chat pod, there's a link to that handout, so you don't have to type in their website address. But this is snowfall totals normally. These are data from 1991 to 2020. And it's pretty easy to see where the lake effect machines kick in at the end of Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. Okay. And these are normal. I mean, think about the normal snowfall in a place over 140 inches. Down Long Island, the normal snowfall is 20 to 40 inches. Okay. So these are normals. But of course, winter weather can come in different patterns. So we'll focus here on New York State. We can just get the general storms that go from east to west, and this is the most common that we get, and those occur year round. But of course, in the winter, that means they're going to just bring storms normally coming from the west to the east. But when we get things like the polar vortex and other storms that tend to bring weather coming out of the poles, we get these Alberta clippers, as they're sometimes called. And those clippers bring with them lots of cold weather. Now, when those go across the Great Lakes, they turn the lake effect machine on. And that lake effect machine is part of the reason why we get such large quantities of snow at the end of the lakes. And this year, Lake Erie actually froze for the first time in a couple of years, and which shuts the lake effect machine off because you can't get as much lake effect if there's not water available to evaporate. Now, they still get some because if the winds are coming in the right direction, they can still get some water off of the other Great Lakes, which are pretty interesting. Heck, Cayuga Lake can have lake effect snow. I've had snow at my house or here at my office. We're only 3/4 of a mile apart, and none at the other because of lake effect off of Cayuga Lake. So lakes are pretty interesting in terms of weather, what they do, things like that. Now, the one that caused that blizzard, um, I'm drawing the pattern a little bit. This is one where it comes up from the south, brings lots of water, and that tends to be a pretty big storm, general area. Okay, the storm of 96 that started the week I got here to Cornell many, many years ago. That was this classic example of a storm that comes up and takes advantage and targets really pretty badly into everything. But of course, we get these nor'easters where the low actually goes out into the Atlantic and then swings back around, hence nor'easter, northeast, because the winds start to come out of the north and the east as they circle around the low. You get the weather pattern. Let's get a color. I don't like white. Let's do purple. When this low, the storm is circulating like this, so the winds come out of the north and east, but they bring lots of water coming off the ocean, and we get ourselves a pretty nasty set of volume of snow. Now, if you're interested in looking back at your own historical data, this is one of the links that's in the handout, and I would advise you to go find this one. This is a pretty cool one. It's called Now Data, okay? The NOAA Online Weather Data, which is the now part. Again, we love our acronyms. You can actually go on and click on a region and go look at historical information at a particular site. Everything from heating degree days and cooling degree days, total snowfall, accumulations, things like that. And you could do it for major weather stations. You can't get every single site, but you can get enough to get your general sense of what you've seen. So I went through and I actually last Thursday, I went and got data for snowfall through essentially into February. There hasn't been enough snow to change this too much. It's actually February 26th, if you want the date that was on there. No, 25th, sorry, 25th is the data you want on there. So you can see they give you data such as for snowfall, the lowest snowfall ever, the highest snowfall ever, the average, okay, which tends to be smooth lines as opposed to big storms jumping in and there. I did it for Ithaca, Islip, and Haymarket up in the lake effect machine off Lake Ontario. Now, when you get these, they don't scale them, so be very careful when you look at them. These are accumulated snowfalls, and if you don't look at them carefully, you think, oh, they look similar. And you see that Islip, that recent storm, made this the snowiest winter ever in Islip since they've been taking the data. But you got to be careful about scale. So here in Ithaca, our normal snowfall for the last 20 years has been averaging about 47 inches. It's actually gone down from what it used to be many years ago. Islip is only 24 inches, okay? But Haymarket, Haymarket, their normal is 168 inches of snow. So just make sure you look at the scale. But again, if you're looking back at what your winters have been like, it's really a useful way for you to get a sense of what size storms you're going to deal with. And remember, you don't want to just plan for the average year. At the same time, it's probably impossible for us to budget and plan for the worst case year. Islip is just going to have to deal with a really, really big amount of snow. And once in a while, we just have to do some changes to overall planning. Now, in terms of the level of service that you've got, um, the level of service deals with what are the conditions on the roadway given the kinds of winter weather that we're dealing with. What that really means is what is the stopping distance? So let's look at the stopping distance relative to each other. These are not total numbers because obviously that depends on the type of vehicle and the speed and a whole bunch of other factors. But if you think about dry pavement and I can stop in a particular distance, slam on the brakes and stop. This is just the stopping portion of the overall stopping distance. If the road is wet, it's going to take another 70% in terms of average. These are, don't get super hung up on exact numbers. But a wet pavement is going to take you longer to stop. There's not as much friction available. And that's, by the way, wet conditions are typically what we design for when we're designing pavements. We design around wet conditions, okay? Now, if it's slushy material but no ice, it takes a little bit more than wet. As long as there's no ice, it's only a little bit more, not too bad. If you've got packed snow and you throw sand on it, it's actually about the same as slush, okay? Once you start getting soft, loose snow, however, that stuff's pretty slippery, okay? Gets under the tires and takes a little bit longer. As you apply the brakes, it literally turns into ice. As you do it, it takes longer. If you've got ice starting to form and you hit sand on it, but it's not packed snow, and there's ice there, it's going to take a little bit longer than that. And of course, snowpack itself takes longer to stop. We used to drive on snowpack, and people just lived with the fact that it took longer to stop, but you didn't have quite the speeds. And of course, the infamousness of ice, which I say 6+, all the books say 6, but truth be told, we know that if it's black ice, it could be a lot more than even 6. You stop when you hit something, like a snowbank or an object, okay? But let's ask yourself this. First question. A bare road policy is always recommended for high volume roads. What do you think? Yes or no? Or true or false, I guess I said. Okay? Now again, you're going to need to set your own policy. We'll come back to this question later on. I'll clear it in a little bit when we get back to it. But ask yourself whether or not you should have a bare road policy. We have become used to a bare road policy, okay? But we'll come back to what the right answer might need to be and think about from an economic and liability situation and the risk that you've got. So now bare road policy would be something where obviously when it's conditions like I'm seeing today here in Ithaca or in the summer, bare road, no problem, right? And here would be a bare road in the winter where the roadway itself, pretty much bare road. Now, On a main road, you probably do want a higher level of service. But how quickly can you get back to a bare road policy? How much chemical, how much snow plowing do you have to actually put down to keep that in that condition throughout an entire storm? And of course, as we start getting some pack on there, is that okay? Well, this is a residential area. Right next to actually where our former snow and ice guy, Dewey Amsler, who wrote the current version of the snow and ice class, used to live. That's how he walked over and took these pictures. For a residential HOA kind of situation, this is fine. There's not really any need to have it much more than this. But that's part of the challenge that we've got to deal with. Now, in terms of some point, you get enough conditions, you get enough snow, you get enough ice. These roads, however, if they're lower on the totem pole, as they say, they may take longer to get back to them and plow them off. So we may get some icy conditions. Is this okay? When is this okay? So one of the challenges of a policy is may not be able to set one that's true 24/7. May be more about related to the types of storms and when we can get back out there and deal with it. And of course, during the event itself, even after it's just stopped, it may take a while to get to it, and somebody has to live on the lowest level of service roadway in a community. And during the event itself, there may not be any plowing at all, depending upon other conditions, which we'll talk about here as we go through our time together. So keep these things in mind. Now, let me just ask, do you have a level of service? And the answers are yes in writing, yes in your head. You need to develop one, no, and I'll come over here and scroll down so you can see the other choice. And then, of course, none of the above. If you put none of the above, if you would please put in the Q&A, what does that mean? What does none of the above mean if you clicked on none of the above? So put that over in the Q&A for me. Okay? And again, if you can't access the polls, you can just put down the answer. Okay? And so what we've got here is we have about half of you have one in writing. Okay? And then somebody in the Q&A says you're not a policymaker or you're a consulting engineer. Well, if you're not doing policy, think about what your community has. What should your community have? Okay? You live in a town or a county. I guarantee you live in a county. And if you don't live in a town, you live in a city or a village. Well, a village and a town. They should have a level of service. Everybody should have a level of service. So we all are on the same page. We're communicating with each other, and it actually reduces the liability for the agency to have a policy. And if it's only in your head, it becomes challenging later on if something happens because people don't know if you're changing it on the fly. So it really does need to be good to have a policy, okay? And then somebody puts in here, they have a storm policy depending on anyone who's on the property. They have a camp. And yeah, you might have different levels of service for different types of roadways, okay? And that's actually considered okay. And again, somebody has to be on the lowest volume system, okay? Now, in terms of a good way to start level of service, just get yourself a map and start thinking about the criticality of that roadway within the system. So this happens to be from the New York State DOT's Federal Classification Viewer. You can just go online and find that. And this shows the arterials, collectors, and of course everything else, local roads within the Ithaca area. Okay, the city of Ithaca and the surrounding environs. So obviously the green roads are the arterials. You're probably going to want to treat them a little bit higher level of service, get to them a little faster. Okay. The red roads would be next. You want to get to them pretty frequently. They're the collector roads that bring people in. So are the blue ones, but they're the minor collectors. So again, you're trying to change your level of service to match the need. But there are obviously going to be some places that don't show up on the official classification. Can you think of a place in your community? You can put this in the Q&A this time. Think of a place in your community where you might want to treat that road a little differently based not just on its classification at the federal level or state level, but what's on the roadway. So what kind of roads or what kind of things along a roadway do you think, I need a higher level of service? I need to treat them a little bit more often. So give me a couple examples in the Q&A. See if somebody can come up with some things. Yeah, road to the hospital. Absolutely. And yeah, we need to think about sidewalks and we need to think maybe about our curves in our systems or downhill grades going to be differently. But yeah, hospital, a school possibly. Again, that's a catch-22 because if the school's closed, at some point we close the school, so it becomes a cutoff, but you can't close the hospital. So yeah, public service buildings, things you have to get to on a regular basis. And of course, these are all going to change things. So now we're going to do this as more of a wordle. What affects which roads and streets have a higher level of service? What else do you want to think about? The volume. Volume is going to make a difference. Oh, by the way, volume also helps you with dealing with the snow and the ice too. Okay? Because there's some energy from the vehicles. Okay? The speed on that roadway, or the expected speed on that roadway. Is it an emergency route? Are there hills? Is it somebody needs to get to a grocery store? Okay? What services are there? What kind of routes? Okay? What you should do, look at this past year. Look at what happened this past year. And now even if you have a level of service policy, it's a great time to revisit that policy and go, does it need tweaking? Have things changed? I mean, raise your hand if your snow and ice policy is at least 10 years old. Raise your hand if your snow and ice policy is at least 10 years old. Okay, for those who've raised your hands, when's the last time you actually made changes to the policy? Tweaked it and gone, well, maybe these roads need to change. Maybe we've had some developments over here. Maybe the hospital has closed or a new one's opened up. Probably at some point we need to revisit that. Now, I will tell you right now, you've got to get the elected board. A good level of service policy should really have the highway official and the board involved. And so one of the things we like to do, we do this on pavement management as well, is setting the level of service. Give somebody on the elected board who's willing to help out, maybe somebody who's a little reluctant, and give them a map. Take that same map, maybe make it a completely blank map, and tell them, we need to set 6 levels of service. Okay? So you can take 1/6 of the road network and make it the highest level. We'll make that red. 1/6 is orange. We're going to treat those pretty high, but maybe not first choice. When we get a really big storm, we're still going to get to them, but a little later. Yellow roads, those are going to be the 3rd tier. And now we're starting to talk the low volume. That's the green, the purple, and the purples. We may not even touch those in an event until it's over. Okay, so you've got to do that, and you're going to do exactly 1/6. You can tweak it a little bit, but it starts to really get a sense of, wow, it's not always easy. Somebody has to live on the last road plowed and the road that might have a lower level of service. You can't really have a one size fits all for your entire system. And of course, you're going to have to coordinate with other agencies because you've probably got, if you're in a city, you've probably got some state routes going through there. There may be county roads within a town road system. And it'd be nice if we actually could coordinate those things. Not always easy, but something to think about. Now, again, looking back at the winter of 25, 26, what are some of the issues that you noticed this past winter that are making you realize we're having some issues? And they can include your route lengths, your cycle time for your snowplows is too long, your time of day, when do you start and stop? Is that an issue? Do you have workforce development problems? Your curves and hills, have they been an issue for you? And by the way, you can check all these you want. The percentages are total, but you can check all you want. Do you have issues with shade? Are there places where you have drifting? And maybe we need to think about snow fencing or cutting the banks a little bit. Do you have parking problems to deal with? Okay. And then where'd my mouse go? There it is. And then finally with pedestrians and cyclists. And that, by the way, is not just limited to an urban area. Okay. And I see somebody in the Q&A has put the pedestrian cyclist issues and dead-end roads have the lowest priority. Again, somebody has to live on that low priority roadway. Okay. So you can start to think about looking back at your policy. What do you need to include? Do you have turnarounds? Some agencies don't. A lot of urban agencies don't have to have turnarounds, but boy, rural agencies almost always have to have a place for a turnaround. How do you set those up? How do you make them work? Okay. Okay, so think about all of those issues as we're looking at our snow and ice policy for the year. Okay. Now, in terms of materials that people use, you're going to have hopefully everything on a cover would be nice. It keeps it dry, but we know there's an economic cost to that, but we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Uh, Everybody has to have some sands now and then. When it gets cold enough, you're probably going to have some abrasives. If you've got some issues with sidewalks, sometimes we have to use sand short term. Okay, some abrasives, but you want quality on that sand. You don't want it to be too chunky. So there's standards for that. And how much you've got and when you use it, that's important. Just curious, how many of you have gravel roads in your network? Raise your hand if you've got gravel roads in your network. Yeah. If you raised your hand, you have to have sand. You can't use straight salt on a gravel road. You just turn it into a mosh pit. So yeah, so you're going to have to probably have some sand somewhere. And most agencies mix a little bit of salt to keep it from freezing. And by the way, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but you don't need a lot to just keep it from freezing. Now, in terms of salts, and it drives me nuts. I will be completely honest with you. People tell me, well, we don't use salt. I was on a meeting this past week. Somebody was saying it's another state, and they were saying, well, we don't use salt. We only use magnesium chloride. Sorry, magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, and sodium chloride are all salts. Okay? They're just different versions. If the chloride atom is mixed with either sodium, magnesium, or calcium in different formulations. Okay? They work because they suppress the freezing point. It's the same way you make ice cream. Okay? So you put down this material and it lowers the point at which it creates a brine or creates a liquid. Okay? So as long as you're in that lower triangle, you actually are lowering the freezing point and you create a liquid brine. And of course, if it's a liquid and you come along with your plow, everything gets pushed off to the side. There's no bonding with ice. And that's where these chemicals are working. Notice, however, as you get dilution, as it gets a lot of snow and ice and melts, it dilutes back towards small percentage. They actually track fairly close to each other because there's not a lot of depression of the freezing point. So yes, calciums and magnesiums tend to get started a little bit faster. They can go a little bit colder in terms of temperatures, but all of them have their limitations. And we have to balance the economics and, of course, the magnesium, the calciums in terms of what they might do in terms of corrosion. So which we use is something we have to think about. And of course, there's an economic concern, there's a cost concern with all of these as well. Now, there are other chemicals that are out there, urea, potassium acetate, CMA. These are used usually in specialized locations because of economics. Urea is very common at airports because you don't get the corrosion with the uh, dealing with airports and aluminum structures don't like when you put salts on them kind of thing. So that's a challenge that we have to deal with. CMA was developed specifically to try to replace salts. That's what it was specifically designed to do. The challenge, of course, with CMA is the economics. It's not that cheap, okay? Now, somebody's already thrown into the Q&A another item, and that is, and there's different terms for this. I'm going to use one that it's sort of the most common that I see. It's called carbohydrate enhanced chemicals, okay? And it started as the waste product from manufacturing other things. Beets, beer, wine, cheese, essentially leftovers from making other products. And those leftover items could be added to other chemicals, including the salts, to help them be sticky. Okay? In of themselves, they don't have as much melting capacity as some would tell you. Okay? Their real value comes from the fact that they can coat and make the material sticky so it stays where you want to put it. Okay? They can keep it from binding up so it stays in the nice small form we want it in grains. Okay? So you don't get big chunks. Okay? And it can provide a little protection from corrosion as long as it doesn't just sit there. Because obviously, if the salt gets into a spot on your bridge or your truck and just sits there, those enhanced chemicals are really only on the surface. And whatever you've coated on, if they're sitting there for a while, that salt's going to corrode your metal away. So that they have their value like everything else. Okay? And the reason comes back to the chemical form. And you've probably all seen pictures like this where you get stripes down the roadway. This is anti-icing, okay? And what we're really trying to do when we're replacing the solids out is we want that material we put down to stay where it's going to do us some good. Straight solids tend to bounce a lot. Pure liquids have their place. There are certain times of storms where you don't want to put straight liquids down because they can actually seize up and freeze up depending on their concentration. Okay? And yes, somebody mentioned molasses. Yes, it's a leftover product from molasses. It's the same thing as those carbohydrate enhanced products. And again, they have their place. They're actually pretty cool things if you use them in the right application. And this is all a form of pre-wetting. Okay? What we're really trying to do is make the salt stay where we want it to. So here's a study that was done. This is actually out of Michigan, where it first got started. And what they did was they just spread some salt. They purposely put it right in the center, 100% of the salt in the center. Okay? And they let traffic go down the roadway. Okay? And about half the salt stayed where they put it. About an eighth of the salt tended to be on the outer third of the pavement. And about 15% wound up on each side. Okay? So not quite a third of the salt was completely lost. Just wound up on the shoulder. Didn't help anybody. Okay? So that's something to think about. Then they took that same salt. They just pre-wet it. They didn't make liquid. They just pre-wet it. And they put it in the exact same location. And now only about 9% wound up being off on the third, and only about 2% lost on each side. Okay? So we're huge fans of using pre-wetting for three reasons. Obviously, it saves us money. We don't like to lose that material off to the side. It helps us in terms of controlling how much material we're putting down so we don't put down too much. Okay? And then finally, it's an environmental issue. It actually does a lot better job. We don't want to damage the environment. Now, before I move on, I do see a Q&A thing here. At one time, abrasives included some small rock chips. Yeah, if you're using sands, or even cinders used to be used at one point. Those have been discontinued for other environmental reasons. But if you're using sands, make sure you use a standard in terms of the quality of that sand, because if you got too big of a chips, you can create liability throwing the chips up and hitting somebody's windshield, things like that. But in terms of environmental issues, let's go back and look at that sand pile that we've got sitting out in the yard that we mixed in about, 10% salt. Okay, so we just mixed a bucket of salt in about every 10 buckets of sand. Okay, so we mixed it in so it won't freeze up. So I get a rainstorm. And 1 inch rainstorm on my piles of salt that are about 50 feet in diameter. Now, actually, truth be told, the sand pile will be slightly taller than the drawing I'm showing here because of the angle of repose and all that. We're not going to go crazy. We're just assuming 50-foot diameter pile of salt. 1 inch rainstorm. I collect all the water that comes off that rainstorm and I put it into a bucket. I boil the water off and I see how much salt is left. Okay? So, I'm going to ask you 3 times. First off, how many of you think there will be more salt runoff, more salt found on just a pure salt pile? Raise your hand if you think I'm going to get more salt in a 1 inch rainstorm off my salt pile. Okay? Okay, got about 6, 7, 8. I'll give you just a sec more. Okay. So about 15 of you. Okay, now watch this. Magically, all your hands are going to get lowered. How many of you think you're going to get more salt coming off the sand pile? More off the sand pile. A little bit less, but pretty close. Equal. Okay. Now, going to lower the hands one more time. How many of you think essentially you're going to get the same amount in both cases? And we're using the American voting system, I see here, because only about 45 of you have voted, which means 70 of you have not. The answer, by the way, is pretty much exactly the same. They're within the margin of error in terms of how much people have found when they've done these experiments. Because what happens is once that rain gets saturated with salt to a certain amount, depending on the temperature, it's not going to pick up any more salt. And so the amount of salt that actually runs off is almost the same. And if you've ever been going down the road and you see a sand pile with little white streaks, that's because the salt's been leaching out. Okay. So from an environmental standpoint, we want to use salt in a lot of cases, but we want to use only what we need, and we'd like to cover it so we don't run it off into the streams and stuff. Now, somebody mentioned in their thing here, my town never used sand in subdivisions with gutters because the sand ended up in a catch basin. Yeah, that's actually a known problem with abrasives. It's actually a known problem where people use sand because we're not going to use salt of any form. But the sands in of themselves can cause issues. And if it's poor quality sand, you can actually get particles in the air, which can be an environmental issue themselves. And you can build up shoulder material at the end of the winter. So again, it's a balancing act. So in your snow and ice control policy, which of these do you use? Do you use salts, abrasives, treated salts? These are where you either add the carbohydrates or even calcium chloride to coat the surface. Straight liquids, anti-icing, where you go out before the storm to layer a layer of material down to keep bonds from forming. And then other. You're welcome to click on the other thing. Nobody said other yet. Okay. So we have, again, not everybody's voting, but that's live. So about 40 of you are using salts, and everybody else is using a mixture of different things. Okay. And that's okay. Having a blended policy is actually a really good idea. We're big fans of using some kind of wetted material, either treated salts or liquids if they're done right. Anti-icing can be very, very effective tool to reduce the amount of material that you have to use, which is good environmentally, liability, economically, lots of good reasons to do it. And again, you can use more than one. And of course, if you've got unpaved roads, you're probably going to have to use an abrasive type of situation. So back to our snow and ice control plan. What else needs to be part of our snow and ice control plan? What else do you have to think about that has to be part of your plan? And if you've already got a plan, which a lot of you said you did, what else is in there that we haven't talked about? And we'll actually touch on briefly here in the last 20 minutes of our webinar. The staffing issues you've got to deal with. Who's responsible for calling the crews out? What are the environmental factors? Are there some roads where you treat them differently because they're near a not landfill, a watershed or a wetland or something perfectly environmentally issues? Yeah. A cost. Economics has to be part of the equation. Okay. Where are you going to store these materials? If you've only got one storage structure in a big county, do you have to drive further because it's under storage and it keeps it dry, but now you got longer distances to drive the trucks? What are the beats or the routes that you've got? How long are they? Do you monitor and log the weather? Yeah, these are all things that need to be included. And by the way, one of the links in your handout are some snow and ice policy plans. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. They're on our website and we gave you those. Okay? Now, in terms of equipment, equipment has come a long way. On the other hand, people have gotten an expectation. But let's just talk briefly about equipment. Of course, most people think about snowplows. So first, how many trucks do you have in your fleet? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I want to see your answers, but don't get hung up on the fact that you're less than 5 and somebody else is in the greater than 25 category. Okay? And somebody I noticed is mentioning the fact that they're sharing routes. That should be part of your policy. Maybe the county and town or the county and city are sharing routes. Okay? Now, how many trucks you have in your fleet is going to depend on several factors. A, how big's your system? Is it 30 miles, 40 miles, 150? In one case, there's a town with over 1,000 miles of road they have to maintain. They're going to have more than 25 trucks. Okay? And yes, just plow trucks we're thinking about. Now, let's go the other way. This is actually a good way to think about whether or not you have the right number of trucks if you're a snow plow based agency. Some agencies set their crews and trucks and everything around snow, some set around summer operations. Again, that may be slightly different depending where you are. But let me ask you this. What is the average plow cycle time in your particular municipality? Again, I know it will vary. I've talked to enough of you that you might have differences in one part of the town or county, or some parts of the city are going to have a shorter cycle. But what's the average plow route cycle time? Is it 1 hour, 1 to 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours, or more than 3? I'm going to let you put your answers in, and then we'll show them here in just a sec. Okay, let's see what you have for answers. Beak. Okay, so A few of you only have a 1 hour cycle time. That's pretty cool. So you're going to be able to have a different set of how much material you put down. You probably can reduce it some because you can get out there quickly. Even 1 to 2, you're probably okay. But if you start talking more than 3 hours, you're going to probably get bonding unless you put more material down. But if you put more material down that's dry, it's not going to be there when you come back because it's going to be pushed off by the traffic. And so now you're going to have to put more salt down. So there's a balancing act with the size of your fleet and what you can actually do and maintain. And you need to think about that as you're setting your policy. So in terms of your fleet, what type of trucks do you have? Do you have six-wheelers, 10-wheelers? Do you have to deal with sidewalks and pedestrian areas? Do you have trails that you can't put a big truck on them? What do they look like this time of year when the ground is soft? What kind of attachments do you have? Do you have plows, wings? What are your applicators? And do you have any feedback controls? So let me ask you this. What kind of new equipment ideas have you used? Something you think you're proud of, you've started using in the last couple of years or last maybe even 5 or 10 years. That pretty cool stuff. Live edge plows. I got a picture of one of those in just a second. If you're wondering, a live edge plow essentially is, think of 1 foot plow blades on little springs that move up and down. Okay? Cameras, two-stage plows with two blades. You know, two blades are better than one for shaving. Same is true for plowing. Tow plows, skid loaders, yeah. Trailer plows. There's all kinds of tools that are out there, and you need to figure out how to use them correctly. And that's a balancing act with everything else. Okay? And of course, snow blowers, which I think of those as specialized equipment, but that's okay. Direct liquid application with a brine tank. You can have tanks on the side, automated spreaders, all kinds of fun stuff out there. Okay? Now, when it comes to plows and wings and shoes, again, that bottom left corner is a live edge plows. Each foot of that plow blade is unique and moves up and down, which also has the advantage if one part breaks, you can replace it out. And if a road isn't as smooth, it can actually be very good to keep it in good shape. But an old-fashioned wing and plow in the bottom right, they work. Okay? Now, most of these days we use hydraulic controls for the wings, but again, some people still, I come across trucks with chains. Okay? Of course, do you run with shoes or not? Raise your hand if your agency uses shoes for your under your wings or your plow. Just raise your hand. Okay. And again, you're going to have to think about how that works. The advantage of shoes is you'll do less damage, the blade to the road. On the other hand, you may not be nice and tight to the roadway. And so some agencies love them, some agencies hate them. Think about now whether or not they're working and are they set at the right height? What kind of down pressures do you have? Okay. And there are different types of shoes, of course. Okay. And yes, you can have blades catch, and the live edge can be a challenge in that respect because each one now can catch. In terms of spreader equipment, if we had the whole day like we do in the normal snow and ice class, which yes, we'll be hosting that this fall, um, we could talk about spreader attachments. We can talk about brine equipment and stuff like that. And of course, the old-fashioned spreader still is used. So take advantage of whatever technology you've got, use it to the best of your ability. Make sure you understand your rate control structures. More and more, we're using higher and higher tech equipment. Okay? And almost everybody is set up to one person plowing. Is anybody here on our call today using two people in their plow still? How many of you are still using two people? Raise your hand. A few of you. Okay. And again, there may be some routes where that's important. Okay. Now, how often do you calibrate your spreaders? Annually, monthly, when you see a change? You have some other cycle, you're not sure, or you don't calibrate. Okay. So most of you are doing that are voting, are doing an annual calibration. Some are doing monthly calibration. Some when there's a change noted. By the way, the easiest way to do a change notice is if you've got plow routes and you know how much salt you're putting down for particular types of storms, and suddenly there's a consistent change, good time to check. Okay. So you can have more than one time when you're going to calibrate. And calibration should be part of your policy. Okay. You should have feedback controls in your system. Okay. This includes cameras in the back to help with backing up, to maybe even see if the spreader is actually doing what you expect it to do. You can have temperature sensors on the truck for both the air and the pavement. And given the choice, I'd rather have pavement temperature than air temperature if I could only have one of the two. And of course, you might have something back at the yard that tells you the temperature, not only where you are, but at some stations around the municipality. Okay? So again, there's lots of different new equipment that are out there. Now, let's take all this and think about your application rate. What factors are going to affect your calibration rate? Do you just use a standard rate? Does precipitation intensity and type change your rate? Does the route length change it? Air temperature, pavement temperature, traffic time of day, or even the weather forecast? What's going to be part of your application rate? And of course, the answer really is yes. Everything in here is really should be part of the equation. If we know we're going to be getting freezing rain, we definitely want some anti-icing. You got to be very careful with liquids. If we know we're going to be having heavy snow, we might be getting out there a little bit sooner, or maybe even thinking about setting some routes further down the road. Okay? Having a standard application rate's easy, but it probably isn't as cost effective as we'd like it to be. And yeah, you can add driver's experience. That can be part of it. Do you train? Do you do snowplow rodeos? Okay? So these are all things that we have to think about. And again, I wish we had several hours, but that's when we have a full class. Just want you to start thinking about your policy. Okay? Now, in terms of your route, the length, of course, cycle time matters. One person versus multiple people. You need to set the equipment up for that. Time of day. Most agencies obviously run during the day. A few run day long at night as well. A lot don't. Again, what is your own policy? What are you doing about that? As I go around the state, by far the most common method for getting started is to make sure you're ready before the school buses. Okay? What do you do on curves and hills? Do you increase your application rates, your intersections? Shaded areas we know don't get as much energy from the sun. Do you have drifting? Do you need to have fences and things like that? So these are all factors that we have to think about. Okay? And then, of course, if you're in an urban area, you've got to deal with traffic and parking and pedestrians and bicycles, and even in rural areas. If you've got people parking, you have to deal with that reality. You know, it could be a church that's only one day a week where people park in large numbers, but you may have to have a slightly different policy to deal with that Sunday storm that comes out there. Okay? Now, in terms of your spread rates and your patterns that you're going to be using, obviously the weather makes a difference in the cycle time, what kind of pavement you've got. If you've got an old beat up pavement that's got a lot of cracks, you're actually going to lose some material down those cracks. Um, and of course, traffic can help you. The traffic makes a big difference. A higher traffic roadway can get away with less material because the energy from the traffic can help you some. On the other hand, you typically can have a little lower level of service on a low volume roadway. So that's a balancing act. And then what, of course, you have for material. So again, if we go back and we look at those factors, as you're thinking about your policy, look back and ask yourself, if I just use the standard application rate, it's the same rate on a high volume road that I get to more often. Maybe we need to have a slightly different rate, at least on different types of roadways, and maybe a different rate when we hit the road the second time during a snow event. Okay? And of course, your route links, now's the time to think about it because you and I both know that if you ordered a truck today, you're not going to see it for next winter. You're probably going to see it the winter after next, assuming we don't get any other supply chain issues. So we're going to be thinking not about 26, 27 winter, but maybe even the 27 and 28 winter in terms of getting equipment. Okay? And we, of course, know there's an economic cost because snowplows are not cheap. Now, let's just ask, how many of you have been through what I would call a declared emergency? Declared emergency by the governor or got a FEMA, all that fun stuff. Raise your hand. You've been through a declared emergency. Yep, quite a few of us have. That's one of those things afterwards you look at it and you go, well, I'm glad I got to do that once. But when you get to do it 4 or 5 or 6 times, it gets like after a while, right? Okay? There's ice storms, there's blizzards. I mean, obviously, if you're from the Long Island people that checked this morning when we started, you're in that group. You're going to be dealing with emergencies. But ice storms are another one that we deal with on a regular basis. But we all deal with emergencies, even if they've never been declared. And the most common by far are crashes. In your policy, do you have a policy for what you do when a crash occurs? Do you send out a whole set of crews? Do you have one person with a pickup truck sized piece of equipment to get out there? What do you deal with in terms of crashes, and how do you coordinate that with the emergency management folks or the police? Okay. And of course, major storms that we have to deal with. Do you have specialized equipment that only goes out once in a while? You know, a snow go or a V plow that never goes out except in a big event. Do you at least make sure that piece of equipment is ready to go so that when that storm does occur, you're ready to go? Probably should take it out at least once and get it going and making sure it works. And in terms of shared services, we know we can have shared services and we can work with each other. Here, a county is filling up a state truck. That has to be part of your policy. And now's the time to think about, did it work? What should we tweak? What can we do better? And what happens in that emergency when our equipment breaks down or our neighbor's equipment breaks down? How do we work with each other? And we do it in such a way that we don't create liability for us or we don't have economic problems. Okay? So back to our snow and ice control policy. Why do we recommend they're in writing? Why do you think we recommend that they're in writing? What would you put down? Consistency. Yep. Mm-hmm. What else we got? Liability. I hate to say it, but that's one of the more critical things. Liability is a very important one. Reduces our liability quite a bit. Okay. It also helps us from a communication standpoint with the public. Okay. It's really important to have that and can actually save us money. And it certainly at least controls the budget and risk issues that we have to deal with. Okay. But from a communication standpoint, everybody's on the same page. And if we've done it well, what happens if? What happens if we have an emergency? If we have staffing issues? If we get, like yesterday, I had to take the day off because I was sick. You would not have wanted me plowing or doing anything, really. What do you do in a case like that? How do you deal with staffing shortages? Okay. So that's why we recommend that. And again, one of the links you've got is a winter maintenance plan. You don't have to write this down. It's available in the handout. Okay? So let me ask you, we're going to finish this up here right on time. What do you need to be ready for the winter of 2026-27? Do you need more trucks, more staff, more storage for salt and sand, a snow and ice policy, support from the board, or you're in great shape, you're all set, you don't have to do anything? And again, I'll let y'all check those off and we'll see. Okay, and by the way, you can put other. If you've got other, please put it in the Q&A pod for me. And you can check more than one. Okay, let's see what y'all came up with. Survey says you need more trucks, you need more staff, you need more storage, a little bit of everything. Now's the time to start thinking about it because as we already mentioned, it may not be 26, 27. It may be later before you can get to that. And yeah, I'd love to have a mild winter, but you never know. I don't plan on a worst case storm, but I can't assume the average either. I need to be somewhere between those. Now, which one of these is most critical from a determining your chemical application rate? Is it the type of precipitation, the cycle time, the air temperature, or the pavement temperature? Which of these is least important? And I bet you're going to guess this one wrong because this one throws people a lot. Though actually, y'all are pretty good. Yeah, very good, actually. Yeah, air temperature, surprisingly. Again, I want all four of these. They're really important. But if someone told me I could have only air temperature or pavement temperature, I'd much rather have the pavement temperature. Air temperature can matter, especially when you get freezing rain issues and black ice. That's actually one of the things that does matter. But your application rate is going to be driven a lot by your cycle time, your type of precipitation, and what's going on the pavement itself. And then what's the stopping site distance shortest? Or what kind of conditions? Is it soft, loose snow, slushy road with no bonded ice, snowpack or ice? The shortest distance. In other words, I put on the brakes, I stop the fastest. So it's not ice. I will tell you that, even though I see people checking ice. I'll give you that hint. And by the way, you can also use of course, the famous none of the above, once I find my mouse and I can scroll down so you can see it. A few of you said none of the above. You can check that if you want. Neil, you're right, because you could always have dry conditions. But the answer actually, of course, is if we got just slush with no ice, that's actually pretty quick. It's not that much worse than wet pavement. So let me, last question then for you. Is a bare road policy recommended for high volume roads? Here's the answers that you had before. I'm going to purposely clear the answers. I'm going to have you vote again. You think it's a bare road policy? Yeah, it's probably not true. It's not a bad idea to have the high volume roads, the more important roads, get treated sooner, but trying to keep them bare, especially during a storm, just creates all kind of problems for you and isn't necessarily going to make everybody safer in that respect. It has to be done cooperatively. So we don't recommend a straight bare road policy, but we've gotten in that habit, and that's one of the challenges we have to deal with. Okay? So now I hope everybody had a good winter. Hopefully maybe we only get no more big storms, maybe just a couple of minor ones would be nice, but you have to be ready for it, and you know that it might occur. So if you have any questions on that, again, feel free to contact us. That's what we're here for. And we hopefully will see you in our workshops, and we will be doing the full snow and ice workshop in this fall. With that, right on time, I thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to send them our way. Let's see, anybody got a Q&A for me? Okay. Next week, we have one more webinar on pavement maintenance. Getting ready for the spring. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.